Professor Chatterjee, good evening. It's a beautiful night. I know that we are going to be talking more about the final encounter today. It is the politics of the assassination of Gandhi by Ashis Nandy. So, how are you before we start?
Not too bad at all, Dr. Magan. Thank you. Very good evening to you as well. Yes, this is a remarkable essay authored by one of India's finest public intellectuals and psychoanalysts who took to intellectual historiography. And it's called The Final Encounter, The Politics of the Assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. It was published in his book, At the Edge of Psychology, which was published by the Oxford University Press back in 1980. So it's been a very long time since this essay was published, 44 years to be precise. And there are very specific reasons why we are discussing this essay today, in the present context in the world, in India, South Asia. But there are also micro political contexts. Our own podcast has done a couple of shows on very interesting personalities, intellectuals, Satyajit Ray and Rabindranath Tagore, and both of them had certain very key ideas on the colonialism, coloniality, and nationalism. And in the previous episode, we discussed Marcus Aurelius and the importance of the interior atmosphere, the inner environment of human beings. So today's discussion, I suspect, is going to sort of touch on all the issues that we discussed in those 3 or 4 episodes that I have in mind. But you have been reading the essay very intently, what I gather from your notes. So what have been your impressions of Ashis Nandy's essay on the politics of the assassination of Gandhi?
All of these things I'm going to share today should all start with January 30th, 1948. 4 gunshots, point blank. There's a prayer meeting. And of course, there's this eventful night that we're talking about, Professor Chatterjee.
Yeah, 4 gunshots fired from point blank range at Mahatma Gandhi. This is Delhi, January 30, 1948. And Gandhi dies. Gandhi is assassinated by Nathuram Godse. Mahatma Gandhi, who has received accolades from Martin Luther King Jr. to Nelson Mandela to Bill Gates to anyone of renown that you can think of, has had Mahatma Gandhi in their thoughts at some point of time or the other. And it used to be fashionable, I think even 15 years ago, to call oneself a Gandhian, albeit people wouldn't realize how incredibly difficult it is to be a Gandhian. And I think even Gandhi was not the perfect Gandhian in many cases of his life. So Gandhianism is naturally much, much bigger a phenomenon than the man himself. So Gandhi was born in 1869, the 2nd of October, which happens to be a national holiday in India. And he lived for 78 years. And before his assassination in 1947, people sort of summarily, describe him as a freedom fighter who brought India its independence. But I think it's better described as the man who brought India back to its soul, or indeed went a very, very long way in doing that. So during 1947, throughout that year, it was marked by catastrophic massacres between the two communities, the 2 major communities in India, Hindus and Muslims. And Gandhi fasted throughout that year, and he kept praying. He was known for his prayer meetings. And his final prayer meeting occurred, or rather, his dream to live 125 years was cut short by this final prayer meeting, which happened on 30th of January. And I think around 5 o'clock in the evening, roughly around that time, he was shot by Nathuram Godse, a Chit Pavan Brahmin. I mentioned this identity not to malign that identity, because that would be marred by danger, marred by intellectual dishonesty. However, it was important that he was a Chit Pavan Brahmin in his life. in the way he saw his life having unfolded and what his destiny was, and he was immediately dubbed as a madman, a schizophrenic, and all that. And maybe there are traces of these things in assassins. Maybe there are traces of these traits in us. Who knows? But psychopathology is not something instant to diagnose, and even today, psychopathology cannot be diagnosed with clinical certainty. So it is not
But
helpful.
Professor
It's not
Chatterjee,
productive. Yeah.
yeah, Nandy said he wasn't demented at all. In fact, his critique is directed to Jawaharlal because he argued that Godse knew what he was doing. In fact, after he pulled the trigger, he had time to escape, but he never escaped. Take us through to that moment.
Well, I'm not equipped to take people through that moment because it is too personal for so many of us in India. So psychologically, it creates a huge, baggage for so many of us, especially people like me, who grew up on Attenborough's Gandhi, which was released in 1982, which was an Oscar bagger, and many Indians, nationalists particularly, labeled that as a British or colonial fantasy of what Gandhi should have been like, or what Gandhi was turned into by the British. But films like those had a great deal of impact on my generation, I'd like to think. So for us, it's still not very possible to talk about the assassination with the kind of objectivity that Ashis Nandy does. But maybe what you and I can do is, and you've raised a very important question. Does Ashis Nandy actually, does he condemn Nathuram Godse? And the simple answer would be no, he does not. And that would be quite horrifying for people of today's generation, which is, as we have been discussing, in our opinions on wokeness, on cancel culture, we are a century of instant stigmatizations. We are a century of instant judgments. We have 2-minute noodles in India, right? Maggie. So it's the Maggie noodles of morality is what this century could sometimes be unfortunately described as. Under the circumstances, Ashis Nandy's essay hits us with a great deal of force because he is not condemning Nathuram Godse. Now that itself is quite staggering for the reader, because what do you expect? Somebody who's assassinating the father of the nation, who will go down in history as having carved out India's independence. It's a different thing that there are hundreds of thousands of other revolutionaries and freedom fighters and leaders in the Congress, particularly, but there are other factors as well. B.R. Ambedkar, who's such a towering personality, he was not part of the Congress, so he is there as well. You mentioned Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. A lot of people would immediately plug in Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the first Deputy Prime Minister of India and Home Minister of India, and who should have been, or who might very well have been, the first Prime Minister. So there's a wide dramatist persona of protagonists. Now, out of that, to single Gandhi has looked problematic to many people. But the assassination of that man, and then you do not condemn the assassin. What kind of an essay is Ashis Nandy writing? And he's writing that not today, but back in 1980, when circumstances were not very different from today, Dr. Madden. Back in 1980, I'll tell you what the problem really was. First of all, the reading public, well, yes, it's probably comparison to today. Social media had not spread so much. There was far less bigotry. There was relatively far less intolerance in the reading public in India and in general. But the challenges were that Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India back then. Indira Gandhi is not related to Mahatma Gandhi, but Mahatma Gandhi lent his surname to Indira Gandhi's husband, who had passed on by the time Ashis Nandy was writing this essay. But that lending of the surname to Indira Gandhi's husband was not of the same faith. So the man, again, I don't want to go into this because this is a complex story and I may not have the facts. So Indira Gandhi is not connected to Mahatma Gandhi through kinship, but through a spiritual, kind of a lineage, as it were. And to talk about Nathuram Godse, who's today, sort of he's being graduated from a madman, schizophrenic, psychopath to a kind of a radical Hindu nationalist. So there's a graduation that has happened in his career, as it were. And today it is not unfashionable to talk about Godse. So today, if somebody was not condemning Godse, perhaps even celebrating him, I may have, tremendous difficulty, or somebody may have, sort of kind of a insecurity watching that, but it will be tolerated. But back in 1980, to make a claim like this, that I'm not going to morally stigmatize this person, and maybe I'll leave it to you to sort of summarize the claim that Ashis Nandy makes. But he says something to the effect of this: that the Gandhi's assassination was made effective by Gandhi himself and Nathuram Godse, naturally, and Gandhi's martyrdom and subsequent heroism was therefore made possible by his assassin. This is a very radical claim, but because he has the benefit of psychoanalysis, he claims himself as a Freudian, but there is more of Jungian analysis happening here, as if to say that Gandhi was the light and Godse was the dark, and these two had to be united. Right. So
hence, Professor Chatterjee talking about this necessity of dying. Ashish mentioned this creativity in the death that happened, because both of them died, by the way, and that both of them, at some point concede to the idea that, for change to really happen, there should be the presence of death in the midst of it. So that's why Gandhi had to die, because, Gandhi also in the essay of Ashish was found to be somebody who longed for it. At the same time, Godse and Ashish essay was also the man who pursued death. And more than that, he is the kind of person that really got us very interested, because Ashish profiled him to be very intelligent, yet unmatriculated. But, also he had some steps follow, the steps of Gandhi at the very beginning of his political career. This kind of profile, and, if you look at this profile in relation to this death that happened towards the end, it's so rich, an analysis by Ashish that, yes, you're right, readers like me would be thinking at the end of the day that, this is a really, really creative way of saying that India has to move on. But move on to where? Where is Gandhi taking us, Professor Chatterjee? Where is Godse taking us as well in this kind of circumstance?
No, it's, okay, that's one way of asking the question. So first of all, let me just, go back to Ashis Nandy's epigraphs in the essay. So there are two epigraphs. And one epigraph, very interestingly, is on a critique of the Mahabharata, or any kind of biography of Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna is one character in the Mahabharata, the epic written by sage Vyasa. But there are other stories, other epics or Puranas being woven around Krishna. So Krishna had an uncle called Kamsa or Kangsa. And Kangsa was his adversary, because Kangsa was cursed that Krishna, or whosoever would be born as Krishna, would eventually assassinate him. And there's Arjun, who's the disciple of Krishna's. And on that famous battlefield in Kurukshetra, Krishna would show his very global kind of an avatar to Arjun. So that epigraph in Ashis Nandy's essay tells us that Arjun loves Krishna, and therefore Arjun's vision is not sharp enough. Whereas Kamsa, who eventually gets assassinated by Krishna in his youth, Kamsa hates Krishna, and therefore Kamsa's vision of Krishna is very, very sharp. So it's a kind of an intimate enmity. To use Ashis Nandy's own phrase, intimate enemy is actually the name of one of his books, published 1984, if I'm not wrong. So where does Gandhi take India? Where does Godse take India? Look, the partition has happened on the 15th of August. And the politics of the partition are well known, and yet they are exceedingly, well confounded at the same time. People don't agree. There is consensus. Did Gandhi want partition? Did Nehru want partition? Jinnah certainly wanted. We all know that. Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted an independent, theocratic Islamic State. Pakistan, India is not a theocratic nation. India does not like theocracy. Yes, parts of people have their fantasies and choices and so on, but India as a nation has never liked theocracy. So what did Gandhi want? He certainly did not want partition. But there are others who are not generally spoken about, like the Hindu nationalist Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, who was also a persona non grata for many decades, and today people have started talking about it. People claim that he wanted partition, but many other Hindu nationalists did not want partition of the country. So there's this very curious connection between Indian nationalism, or what people sort of pejoratively call Hindu nationalism, and some critics claim that it was the nationalists, Islamic and Hindu, who created the partition, and yet that is not true. So in 1948, when we are seeing Gandhi in that prayer meeting in Delhi, we are at an impasse. Nathuram Godse also feels this impasse. Nathuram Godse was a Gandhi supporter. He was a very staunch Gandhian. And both these people are very, very Hindu. They are staunch Hindus, if the word Hindu makes any sense, because it has all sorts of meanings. Gandhi's Hinduism, very interestingly, begins in London, if not earlier, but London certainly 1888, when he's, I think, around 18 or 19 years of age. And it's the Theosophists, Helena Blavatsky and Annie Besant, who send delegates to Gandhi, and they give him the Gita. This is the first time Gandhi is reading the Gita in translation. He's heard of the Gita from his mother back in Gujarat in India. But he is getting introduced to the Gita by the Theosophists in London. He is also very passionate about the Bible, which reflects not only in his values, but also in his linguistics. Gandhi writes a very beautiful language, which is instantly, recognizable, understandable, and there are layers. And he writes very short sentences, like the King James's, Bible version. And Gandhi has, whether because of political compulsion or because of his ecumenicism, he's also embraced the basic tenets of Islam. So he has no qualms, and the word Ashis Nandy uses is synthesis. He has no qualms or kind of inner conflict in synthesizing what seemed disparate. But in his spirit, these have all been digested and made into a non-fragmented whole. To talk about Godse, now Godse has performed a feat, Dr. Magan, which I can unabashedly tell you that many people of my ilk would actually they would bribe, or they might even go to farther extents to commit that feat. He's memorized the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. Now, people like me have a smattering of Sanskrit in them because Sanskrit was taught in schools. But today, especially at a time when we are seeing this great surge of nationalism throughout the world, people are turning to their mother tongues or their original languages, as it were. And Sanskrit is in many circles seen as that. So to memorize the Gita in a classical language, again, that's an example of great religious fervor. So Gandhi knows Vaishnavism, biblical truths, and Islamic tenets. And he is a Hindu. He calls himself a small man in search of God. Godse is a Hindu of the Vaishnavite kind, because the Bhagavad Gita generally is associated with Krishna Bhakti, Krishna consciousness, and Krishna worship. And there's also Upanishadic, non-dual aspects, which we will not go into today. So these two are very, very different Hindus at the end of the day, despite probably studying the same texts. Now, you told me that you found interesting a facet of Godse's life, that Godse was raised as, and Ashis Nandy talks about it, this Godse was raised as a female. Actually, it's not a female, really, because this will create a wrong representation of certain kinds of Indian culture to people who have not experienced it. But there is very little. You're right, because there are no alternatives to explaining this. He's raised as somebody who, or something, or some kind of a character that represents female energy, female powers.
With a piercing here, right?
Yeah.
That's what Ashish is is telling. You know, he was raised like a girl, and during this time, he was oralizing everything, and expected to be doing or expected to be doing what a girl is doing. But Ashish also said that, you know, towards the end, it never really made him feel like a girl eventually, because he was even more masculine growing up. He was a very strong political individual, and he knew what he'd be doing in life. And, you know, people are seeing this. In fact, he got this newspaper company and wanted to even more cultivate his his stance against Gandhi. And also, we were told that he had this cloth shop, always trying to make sure that he would really further his goals and everything. So this is the kind of image that we are seeing from the essay of Ashish. Entirely a very good picture of Godse. More than that, the similarity between Gandhi and Godse is a very striking account in the essay. But there is a there is a disjunction, Professor Chatterjee, when it comes to the core idea here, because Gandhi wanted to centralize the periphery and wanted to peripheralize the center, which Godse never ever liked. Say something about whatever this is that made him so angry.
Yeah. That's an interesting formulation, peripheralizing the center and centralizing the peripheries. Now, I would hazard to say that's despite being a wonderful formulation, excellent, full marks to you, because one would imagine you not to be experiencing the Indian milieu today as, let's say, an Indian centered here would be. So you are actually speaking about the challenge that India faces even today. India's peripheries are a great challenge. But back then, I'm not sure. And also, we have to give credit to Ashis Nandy, because he's planting a perspective in your mind, or in the minds of the reader. And we have to see it as that, a perspective, not fiction, not reality, but a perspective. Ashis Nandy has done this in the past as well, or in a different essay, I'm sorry, which he writes later, that where he talks about Rudyard Kipling and Sri Aurobindo. Now, Rudyard Kipling who gave currency to the white man's burden. Rudyard Kipling was a Western man, supposedly Christian, brought up in India, and spent some of his most successful journalistic years in India. Ashis Nandy saw Kipling as culturally Indian and culturally even Hindu. Sri Aurobindo, who would go on to be one of the great thought leaders of Hindu thinking and nationalist thinking in the 20th century and even after the independence, Sri Aurobindo is somebody, Ashis Nandy would say that he is more Abrahamic in his cultural bent. So he knows the scriptures in Sanskrit even. He writes amazing English translations of those scriptures, but his education and his ethos is coming from the West, from England particularly. Yeah. Ashis Nandy does something very similar to Gandhi and Godse as well. Very interestingly, people can have differences, people can immediately agree, but it's very, very fascinating what Ashis Nandy is doing. He's showing that, look, you've said Gandhi was colonized, and Gandhi himself said, I was colonized, and in experiments with truth, he says all sorts of things about himself which scandalize people. But Gandhi had amazing talents and amazing gifts from whosoever the powers be. So all his negative traits got hidden, and he was very transparent about his life. So he himself called himself colonized, and then he decolonized himself, and then he had this very parliamentary and almost biblical, or let's say very, very polite way of dealing with the British when everybody was baying for British blood. So people have claimed Gandhi to be not Hindu enough or not Indian enough. But then there is Godse, who's supposedly so fluent in Sanskrit and does not feel very confident in English. But he is exceedingly manly, within quotes, or masculine in his thoughts or in his vision about his destiny. Here he is brought up like a female deity. Now, this goes back to actually Maharashtra is very far from Bengal, but Bengal, Assam, the eastern part has been exposed to a cult of Shakti worship. That is, and this comes from pagan practices as well. So worshipping the female energy, worshipping Mother Earth, worshipping your mother, worshipping your sister, your spouse, and so on. Now, that is to some extent what happened to Nathuram Godse as the, let's say, pseudo or the quasi female deity. And he grew up to be, Shakti actually means power. Shakti literally translates into power. So that Shakti worship that he was exposed to made him a very, at least in his imagination, a very masculine man. And he was disillusioned by Gandhi's spirituality. So it was Gandhi's Hinduism that disillusions a fellow Hindu. It is not the other way around. And he ended up doing something which Ashis Nandy would, I think, go on to describe as perhaps not Hindu enough also. And he defended himself in the English language. There's no problem. We are talking in the English language. So it's not the language that is important, but until that day, Godse had not spoken with such fluency.
Yeah.
It was almost like a coming of age moment for him. He became a man in his own perspective after assassinating Gandhi.
Yeah. So Professor Chatterjee,
Ashis Nandy, just if I can complete, Ashis Nandy gives, back in 1980, he's giving Nathuram Godse an unprecedented platform posthumously to come and explain his psychology. And that is why, this book is contained at the age of psychology.
That's the reason why when you spoke earlier about him being so taught about the feminine role and everything, I was about to say to you that he was quite known for his attack against Gandhi because he thought that Gandhi emasculated India. And this is very interesting because Godse would contend that it was Gandhi who emasculated India. But if you also listen to Gandhi, Gandhi was, there is this cosmic femininity and masculinity as well in the world of Gandhi, which is also explained in a very different light. Well, it's a very consistent contention coming from Godse that the Brahmanic culture is being isolated, and thus this is the kind of emasculation he was talking about, and this is not the kind of India they want. But on the other side, Gandhi's progressive thoughts about how India could become really, really masculine. It's when you acknowledge the cosmic femininity in the middle of it. This is very interesting, Professor Chatterjee, which I know very well. You could say something as well to give clarity on this ideology of Gandhi as opposed to the idea of Godse.
Again, this is not something that one can very easily transmit. What you're calling cosmic femininity, and femininity itself is a problematic word today. So one can't even begin to describe these things, especially in the English language, especially when what Ashis Nandy is writing might be actually intelligible to people back in 1980. But today, most people have, I think, forgotten the distinction between Purusha and Prakriti. Now, I'm using two Sanskrit terms, basically Hindi or Hindustani terms. Purusha literally means male. Prakriti literally means nature. But actually, the meanings they acquire in the cosmogony or the let's say the theology of India, if there can be one, is exactly what you said: cosmic femininity, cosmic masculinity. It is not the individual's gender or sexuality that we are talking about. Let's be very, very clear about that. Okay, so there should not be any confusion. There are energies which the ancient texts have identified as Purusha, not meaning male, and Prakriti not meaning nature, although those are the literal meanings. Purusha means something which Purusha basically means spirit. Nature or Prakriti basically means matter. So it is that, that non-duality of spirit and matter that Indian philosophy, ancient Indian philosophy prides itself on. A lot of religions, I hate to generalize, and I may not even be true in this case, but a lot of religions seen from the Indian point of view seem centered on biology. Indian religions, if you want to call it Hinduism, are centered on psychology. So they have figured it out, as they would like to think, that look, there's the external, there's the internal, And with both, you have something happening. Your Ashish Nandy is telling us that without Gandhi there is no Godse, without Godse there is no Gandhi. So do not rule out what you're calling cosmic femininity of Gandhi's worldview from Nathuram Godse's life and career, and do not rule out Nathuram Godse's avowed masculinity from Gandhi's very long career. So this is very complex, Dr. Magan. We cannot simplify these notions in biological terms and the kind of language we use in the 21st century. But I'd like to sort of row back to the major point that this essay makes, other than sexuality and psychology.
Yeah.
Now, this was my challenge growing up in India, because I think even before I read Ashish Nandy, I saw something in Gandhi's life, something in the life of his assassin or assassins, because many attempts had been made on Gandhi's life even prior.
Three, actually, right? Three attempts.
Three unsuccessful attempts since 1934.
Godse being Godse is no longer the attempt because he really killed, Gandhi.
These were the recorded ones. There may have been unofficial attempts as well, so which we don't know. Now, one of the points of this essay is that Nathuram Godse is not the killer of Gandhi. He's a character. So remember, all the world's a stage, or remember the ancient Indian dictum, Brahma is true, everything else is false. So in that light, in that Shakespearean dramatic light, Nathuram Godse is not the killer of Gandhi. It is the Indian state. It is the Indian people even who have conspired in the death of Gandhi. Because in death, like you very rightly said, he's peripheralizing the center and centralizing the peripheries, both of his life and the lives of the citizens of his nation. The second, very important point that this essay makes is that do not underestimate the repressed energies of India. There are peripheries. You may discard them as what goes under Brahminism. Brahminism is that concept in sociology which identifies relatively high caste people trying to concentrate all the wealth and so on. But in the case of Nathuram Godse, he was high caste by birth, but he had no privilege in society. So there are people out there, Dalits, who are the lowest of the low in India, or who were actually once upon a time, before untouchability was eradicated by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And then there are people of all stripes, whether that's the female minority or people who feel minor, whether it's the Muslims. Even Brahmins have been identified as an economically weak category in recent times. So there are multiple kinds of people in India who have felt repressed from time to time. And the Chitpavan Brahmin community, that Godse came from, was also feeling debilitated economically.
And this is displaced elitism, Professor Chatterjee. Am I correct?
I mean, could you explain what you mean by displaced elitism?
Because Ashish continued to say in the essay that these are the forces that Gandhi wanted to remove from the center. So the kind of elitism, the Mahashatriya Brahmin group, where Godse came from, this was the group that was no longer sort of present in the Gandhian framework. So is it fair to say that this is the kind of elitism being displaced in the Gandhian framework, which in a way fired back? And that's the reason why they're saying that the Gandhian freedom is very expensive because it took us life.
Well, yes and no. Gandhi was never a retributionist. So if by displacing elitism you mean that, oh, you guys have wielded power for so long, let me identify you, let me label you. Tomorrow onwards, you're not going to wield power, I'm going to wield power, and I'm going to distribute it to those guys. If that is what you mean by displacing the elitists and bringing the poor people, the underdogs into the center, I would say no. Because Gandhi was a realist and he wanted very, very gradual. I mean, he was so realistic that that anti-caste activists, sometimes including Ambedkar, would get infuriated by Gandhi. Gandhi was also against caste. He was also against untouchability. He was against
Yeah.
hierarchies. But he was
Yeah.
realistic. Now, the Chitpavan Brahmin community was not the elite in Nathuram Godse's time. This is a huge fallacy that we commit, simply because Indian society seemed, or it's been taught to work according to the Varna system, the four tier system. Then we identify somebody belonging to some caste, and then we superimpose an economic or cultural value on that person. We bracket him. But Nathuram Godse was clearly not the elite at this time. In fact, after Gandhi's assassination, because Nathuram Godse came from the Chitpavan Brahmin community, a lot of Chitpavan Brahmins had to suffer police atrocities,
Yeah.
state atrocities after Gandhi's assassination. Many lost their lives.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that, yes, Brahmins have wielded power in many parts of India at various points, but so have Vaishyas, that is the merchant community, so have Shudras, that is the, let's say, the quote-unquote least privileged community of people, but they were not least privileged. That's the whole anti-caste movement, that, look, you are not superior, nobody is, no caste has the monopoly over the intellectual and the monetary resources. We all have ruled India from time to time. That's the whole anti-caste movement all about during the independence struggle. Today it has changed its color, and today when we look back on Godse, if we identify him as being of the elite community, we would again commit a serious error in understanding history. And that is what Nandi is implicitly warning us about, Dr. Madam. That do not suppress these energies, because it will come back and fire at the Gandhis of our minds.
It's true. That's why towards the end, as I shared earlier, he wanted to die. After the partition, he was very weak and wanted to die, and even thought about the many things that could have happened to him. There's this niece, grand niece, he so liked to be with, and he shared so many things to her before he died. And in a way, he was so prophetic in all these things, right? So towards the end, Ashish was really planting a seed in the readers, and wanted us to really rethink about everything, about martyrdom. Who really is the martyr here? I mean, who deserves the accolade at the end of the day? Both of them wanted a different kind of India, or both of them wanted to progress India, or to move India further, to emancipate India to a level where everybody can understand why they should be defending themselves. That's Godse's framework: defend, defend, defend. Gandhi's framework is to defend, at the same time be very liberal with it and not use violence. And that's the reason why there's this very beautiful thing towards the end, Professor Chatterjee, that he wanted people to think that he wanted people to think that, to the colonizers, you can only feel victorious once the defeated party acknowledges that. And that's very poignant, because in the way of acknowledging defeat, as for Gandhi, it should be non-violent. But as for Godse, it has to be countered with violence. And these are two opposing forces, really. So I think it's a beautiful thing to say, coming from Ashish's essay, that he never wanted to put it so bluntly. It's never a black or a white. There's something at the middle that he wants us to think about. And yeah, you're right. He's never really saying that Gandhi had to be the one to be upheld, or Godse for that matter. But at the middle, there's the audience, there's you and I, there's the reader. And we are made to think about these things.
Yes, to put it in more psychoanalytical terms, not because I have any expertise in the subject, but because Ashis Nandy does that. In this essay, although he does not exactly spell it out, to put it in the psychoanalytical triad, the classical Freudian triad, we are the ego, and Gandhi was the superego, and Nathuram Godse was the id. So it's not as if the id is illegitimate. It's not as if the id does not have a right to exist, and it does not as if it will not exist just because you don't want it to exist. You can't wish it away.
Mhm.
Also, as you very brilliantly summarized, yes, there is this amazing facet in Gandhi. Whether he got it through the scriptures, because it exists in Indian scriptures, it exists in several classical philosophies, it exists in the life of Christ. That if you understand the power of the other person to feel ashamed, to feel embarrassed, if you believe in the capacity of human beings to reform themselves, to rectify themselves, and it's an inner triggering mechanism, not something that comes from outside, that can indeed stimulate the
Mhm.
acknowledgement of the withdrawal of the other. In this case, the political other, that is the British. He does not, by the way, I've used the word other, but he does not otherize with any sense of animosity. The British are not to be, sort of shoved away. Just give us the political control back of our
Mhm.
own nation. You don't have to go en masse. Gandhi's position was not to otherize the British, but to acknowledge that the British are not necessarily superior to Indians,
Mhm.
and politically they are not legitimate. They're not a legitimate entity in India any longer. This acknowledgement, according to Gandhi, had to come from the British. For God's sake, it was, let's just push them away sooner than 1947, and that was what
Mhm.
Hindu nationalism also was all about. Um, Now, you mentioned that the martyrdom, you're going one step ahead. You're saying that the martyrdom is not a martyrdom as long as it is not acknowledged. I think you said something on those lines. And Gandhi, who wanted to live 125 years, it's almost as if he's understood in early 1948 or by the end of 1947 that, look, I don't mind if I am not remembered because I don't want to be immortal anyway.
Mhm.
Gandhi is on these notes, Indian notes. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's visible, but that is Gandhiji.
Very
So
visible. Yeah.
he has been fiscally immortalized, but he does not have these delusions of immortality.
Mm.
What he wants is Indians to feel closer to their superego. That is to feel that slight bit of shame. He wants Indians to know before his death. That is, so he's almost planned his own martyrdom. That if
Mm.
I die, if I become a martyr, they will feel that ever slight shock, that
Yeah.
shame, and this can bring back the balance between the ego and the superego, and shift the balance between the id and the superego back to the center. So that is what Ashish Nandy's essay is telling us. Like it or not, agree with it or not, he wrote this in a very compelling fashion in
Mhm. I
1980.
agree.
One can write it today when there's a multitude of opinions, when there's social media, when one is better informed. But him writing it back then, I think, speaks volumes about how well he understands and how empathetically he feels for Gandhi as well as for Godse.
Hence, there's a need to mention this very important phrase from the essay, this posterity or vindicating posterity. Well,
Hmm.
showing me the bill today with Gandhi's face, that just proves how people identify themselves with him, with his ideology, how this physicality of Gandhi's presence is kind of telling everybody that the event on January 30th, 1948 would resonate, right? In a
Hmm.
very immortal sense. And
Hmm.
each time you have that money, in your hand, you'd always go back to the January 30th assassination with Godse still in that kind of memory. This has been very, very intellectual, Professor Chatterjee. Going back in
Yeah.
time, talking about Godse and Gandhi and this whole Ashish essay, which stirred you and I. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Thanks to
it's
you
okay. This
for
is,
bringing. Thanks to you for bringing such a complex reading of the essay on the table. I think we haven't been able to cover everything that you had noted down, but
mhm,
the stuff that you shared with me was
mhm.
riveting. So I hope we get to discuss it some other day.
some other day. It should constitute another podcast. It's a very layered essay, very principled as well. And like it or not, there are more than 20 points. Earlier, when I talked about this or when I thought about this, too bad we can only have 30 minutes or so. That's the reason why we have to say to our viewers today something very important, Professor Chatterjee. Please start with it.
Viewers, thank you so much for watching our podcast, for showering your love on us. Please like, share, and subscribe, and please do comment. Viewers, we would love to hear your thoughts, your readings of the essay. Please try to share your experiences, political, social, moral, with us in relation to the essay and the other podcasts that we are doing. We do not delete comments, so please don't worry. We have to abide by YouTube standards. So if we feel that something is absolutely 100% absurdly overboard in the language or the intention, then maybe YouTube will have to step in, or one of our moderators will have to step in. But other than that, we would love to hear from you. And Dr. Magan, thank you once again. It's been such a wonderful conversation. Would you like to share your piece as well?
Of course. Our dear viewers, as Professor Chatterjee said, we so love everything that has happened since day one. So we, again, tell you this. You have to engage with us, like and subscribe, and share this with friends. If you want to ask questions, please do so. We're going to be responding to you any time of the day. And there are a lot more in store for you. So please engage with us and help us grow our very beautiful BV community. From the Philippines, I would say maayong gabi natin tanan in a very, very warm way. What about you, Professor Chatterjee?
I am in India, and I wish all of you a very, very warm namaste to wherever you are watching from, and I hope to see you in the next show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Till next time.